As regards myself, my name is Andrew. My specialty is in Islamic theology. I speak Arabic. I study classical Arabic as well as modern Arabic, specifically within Islam. And what I'd like to talk about tonight is the situation with Islam and the West. What it is, where it's going, where it came from, and what we can do about it. Now, I should begin by saying that historically speaking, the situation with Islam, the West, and the implications that it has for our future is nothing new. And what we are seeing is the continual unfolding of a long and persistent problem which cannot be solved by political, economic, educational, or intellectual means. What we are seeing in our own times is the manifestation and fruition of orthodox Islamic theological teachings being applied within the West. Now, these teachings come from the innermost being of Islam, and they can never be changed because they are the fundamental presumptions believed in faith upon which the Islamic religion is founded. And what is different is that for the first time in Western history, the conflicts, the problems, and the other issues which stemmed from these theological dogmae have moved from the Islamic world into the Western world primarily through the immigration of people from Muslim countries coming to the West. To this I'd like to add a little bit, and that is the role of theology in the relationship between Islam and the West. Now, as with all religions, they are founded upon unchanging presumptions, which we call faith. These presumptions form the foundation of religion because it is out of them that man derives the answers to the questions of his existence and meaning in the world. And this in turn affects how we perceive society, culture, and the way we relate to our fellow man. In the case of the West, we collectively trace our heritage to the Greek and Roman civilizations. A Greco-Roman society sustained a love for inquiry, excellence, and the pursuit of knowledge, as well as a sense of order for human social life. However, despite their accomplishments, neither Rome nor Greece had reached a definitive, lasting answer to the questions surrounding human existence and purpose. And this is the great accomplishment of Christianity and Judaism, because it was through these religions that the West's already tremendous achievements culturally and historically were instilled with a greater meaning and purpose outside of ends into themselves. Briefly said, Christianity and Judaism taught three simple points that caused such a great influence. There is a God, this God is love, and that man was created in the image and glory of this God. And the result of this was tremendous, because from this we in the West came to assert as truth, and definitively speaking, that the world and universe was created as a place of law and order, which founded our understanding of science, inquiry, rationale, and absolute truth. We accepted the idea that all men reflect their Creator and are loved by Him, and it was from this that we derived ideas of dignity, mercy, human rights, freedom, and liberty. It has affected all areas of our society, our understanding of ourselves, government, the judicial system, our legislative process, social relations, and even the language and idioms which we use when we speak. In short, what Christianity and Judaism brought to the West was an understanding that man's existence was something good, directed to a greater purpose outside of himself, and would lead to man's transformation and that of society. Now, Orthodox Islamic theology, in contrast, teaches that yes, there is a supreme deity. However, this supreme deity, in the words of the Quran, يَفْعَلْ مَا يُشَاءُ. He does as he wills, for the sake of divine will. Regarding man, man is a slave, whose purpose is to obey the will of Allah, whatever that may be. And it's best expressed in the Quranic verse, خَلَقَنَّاهُ الْإِنسَانِ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ فَرَدَدْنَاهُ إِلَى أَفْصَلِ السَّافِلِينَ إِلَّا لِلَّذِينَ عَمِلُوا وَعَمَلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ فَلَهُمْ أَجْرَاءُ غَيْرُ مَمْنُونٍ. Verily, we have created man in the best of molds. Then do we abase him, we bring him down to the lowest of the low, except for those who believe and do righteous deeds, referring to Muslims and Islam, as many of the classical Quranic commentators will mention. For they shall have a reward unfailing. Now, the theological results of this understanding in Islam are as important as those in the West as it applied to Christianity and Judaism, because Allah can only be understood through the perspective of His absolute will. He does what He wills because He wills it for the sake of divine will itself. His actions can have no purpose should He will other than for the sake that He willed them to be such. And man is a mere creation whose existence is because Allah wills, and Allah raises up or belittles him for no reason other than will. Reason order, purpose, and the very existence of man are as long as Allah wills that they are, unless He chooses to change them, and they are something else. And this is really expressed excellently in a common Muslim prayer supplication. Sometimes you'll find it in Muslim textbooks, sometimes you'll hear it when Muslim speakers speak. Allah guides whomever He guides, and whoever Allah guides will never be misguided because Allah has guided him. And whoever Allah misguides will never be guided because Allah has misguided him. Therefore, when we think of science, rationale, reasoning, and intellectual inquiry as we understand them in the West, it is not seen this way in Islam. Reason exists solely to promote the already understood theological presumptions without asking questions. Never at any point in Muhammad's life did he say, ask and you shall receive, seek and you shall find, or knock and the door shall be open to you. But he did say, whoever criticizes Allah or His Prophet, referring to Muhammad, incurs the curse of Allah. And you will find this consistently throughout the Quran as well as the Hadith, albeit phrased in a different phrasing. As for the meaning of life, Orthodox Islamic theology teaches that life's purpose is the propagation of Islam, so that one day, as Allah willed according to Islamic belief, all men will submit to Islam and the commands of Muhammad. There is no such thing as love in Islam. There is only Islam, which is submission. And now the result of this is love in Islam. There's no concept of love as we understand it. It's only submission. The basic difference is that those are attributes that describe Allah. However, Allah's nature is never known outside of absolute will. I do what I can because I can, for the sake that I can, without reason or purpose. And the result of this is obvious, because the Muslim world, even during its golden age, which historians classify as being between the 8th and 12th centuries, was never able to rival in a worldly sense the splendor of the Greek, Roman, Persian, or Syriac past. And following the destruction of the Muslim world by the Mongol sacking of Baghdad in 1256 AD, it has never recovered. In addition, prior to this, since the earliest days of Islam, the Muslim world has been perpetually consumed by war, mostly between fellow Muslims of different sects, usually Sunnis and Shias, whom, because of their religious differences, regard each other as mutual apostates and therefore without human dignity. It is true that there have been individual intellectual stars of Islamic society. However, when we look at these people, they are few in comparison to the numbers which the West has produced, and while they have done great things, they are pale in comparison to the accomplishments which the West has made. To this, it's important to understand that the West and Islam are intrinsically different from each other. As oil separates from water, the two can never be mixed together. In the same way, the West and Islam are two completely separate societies that can never be mixed into each other, and vice versa. And the difference is, once again, it stems from theology. The Judeo-Christian theology, which formed part of the cultural and social identity of the West, as opposed to Islamic theology, which respectively formed the religious identity of many Muslim nations. Judeo-Christian theology, it gave us something that taught us hope, encouragement, purpose, order, and most importantly, a love of fellow man. Because God is love, man was created in love, and it was in love that man would return to God upon death. On the contrary, Orthodox Islamic theology restructured the barbarism of Arabia and codified it into a system under Muhammad, so that it changed from being an isolated geographic phenomenon to be reflected forever as divinely revealed truth in Orthodox Islamic theology. Now, into this is the great hope of Islam, that one day peace will come when the entire world is converted to Islam. In Arabic, it would be to be made to submit to Islam. And with this would come the elimination of all non-Muslim religions and thought which does not accord with Islamic teaching. Now, for this reason, obviously you can see why there have been so many conflicts between the Western world and Islam, especially militarily. Because the West and Islam have met, as you all well know, many times on history's battlefield. And every time, the West has been able to repel the advances of Islamic armies. The first of this was in 732 AD, when Charles Martel, at the request of the Pope, faced Caliph Abdurrahman at Poitiers, France, in what some people have called the battle that saved Western civilization. In 1387, a priest and Saint John St. John Capistrano, when he was 73 years old, went to the city of Belgrade with a small force and successfully fought off the entire Turkish army, once again preventing the Islamization of the Balkans as well as Eastern and Central Europe. And finally, at the urging of the Pope in 1683 AD, on September 11th, Polish King Jan Sobieski conclusively defeated Islam's armies and pushed them back into the Balkans, which spelled the decline of the Ottomans as well as much of medieval Islamic civilization. If it were not for a Western military victory in each of these circumstances, it is almost inevitable that the West would have been Islamized today. In addition to this, there have been many other smaller and equally significant events that gradually over the centuries preserved the West from destruction, culturally and religiously. Today, however, Europe and America are in a situation with Islam unlike any other in history. There has been no major conflict between the West and Islam since 1683 AD with the Ottoman expulsion from Poland. Significant social changes, however, beginning at the turn of the 20th century in Western society have caused significant declines in the support structures which have prevented or stopped Islamization in the West. Some of these are more applicable to Europe, but they also are happening within America, so I feel it's relevant to speak about both. The first of these is there have been population declines, and with this has come a decline in family structure, increased divorce rates, low birth rates, and abortion that has been supplemented by massive immigration from Muslim countries. Second, there has been a steep decline in religious practice and observance, joined with a growing social hostility towards religion from non-Muslim Westerners. And finally, there have been cultural, intellectual, and moral declines that have resulted in several generations of Western people being brought up without a sense of societal identity, a love for intellectual discovery, or even self-respect. On the other hand, if we look at Islam, Islam has seen a resurgence in religious revivalism and practice globally. Many Muslims today have large families. They're generally more stable in their husband-wife relationships. They encourage marriage. And when pregnancy happens, intended or not, they have a child and they raise it as a Muslim. Muslims teach their children a sense of cultural identity, encourage them to study the hard sciences, and promote the building up of themselves and their own Muslim communities. And religiously speaking, Muslims are generally stronger in their faith and devotion to it, and they are definitely unafraid to practice it in public. Now, this situation that we see in the Islamic world is happening across the world. However, it would be less of a concern if it were limited to Muslim nations alone. On the contrary, the West has been significantly affected by this, once again, because of massive immigration and the establishment of Muslim communities in the West that started in the 1940s after World War II and coupled with the social declines I mentioned earlier, taking place already within the West. The result is that Islam has been able to spread pervasively through Western society, and primarily through two means. The first of these is conversion. Namely, that people who are born in the West of non-Muslim extraction are searching for meaning and stability in their lives, and they are either unwilling to discover their Western heritage, or they're ignorant of their Western heritage, and they turn to Islam to provide a persistent, plausible, and meaningful answer to life's questions and a structure in religion and culture. The next case is primarily with Muslim men in the West who seek to marry non-Muslim women, and upon marrying one, insist that at the very least the children are born and raised as Muslims. And if not, it may also include having the spouse herself convert to Islam. And this, I add, is a great danger, because the spread of Islam through conversion and intermarriage is the greatest long-term threat the West faces, because it is through these two venues that it is able to institutionalize itself within society. People often note, I should add, and very correctly so, that Islam has historically spread by the sword, as some people like to use the term, meaning through military conquest and jihad. And this is very true. However, from the perspective of Orthodox Islamic theology, as well as Islamic history, jihad is merely a means to achieving a greater end, and that is the conversion of the entire world to Islam. And to this, I'd like to offer you an Islamic perspective. What is a more efficient means of propagating Islam, especially within the case of the West? Jihad, or gradual conversion through evangelization and intermarriage with Western women? Well, the answer is clear. Conversion and intermarriage, because they are simple and easily performed means to accomplish the same ends which jihad intends for. Both means have worked well, and their effects are lasting, because if a person converts to Islam or marries into a Muslim family and raises their children as Muslims, those people will assume positions in society and continue through them to spread Islam. It's even more perilous because this kind of approach cannot be stopped because it's a matter of personal choice. Nobody's being forced to convert to Islam, mind you, but rather Islam is being presented to them, and these people are making a personal decision out of their own free will and choice to accept it and believe it. Because of this situation that we face, there are no short-term solutions. There are short-term means that we can take. There are short-term means that we can take, but there are no short-term solutions. The situation that we see developed over the course of a century, and most likely, if we want to speak in realistic terms, it's going to take at least a century or more for it to be resolved. I emphasize, though, that the solution most likely will not come from government or politicians, but it will come as Islam spread itself through individual people working in society. It will come from the West, from individual religious leaders, cultural leaders, and members who will look to confront it in the same way that Islam approached us. And to that, I want to suggest 3 points that we can look at in forming a holistic response toward this. The first step begins with ourselves. The West must rediscover its religious, historical, and cultural identities that we have given up in the name of misguided compassion for people who do not share our identity or the compassion that we have striven to give them. We cannot confront Islam unless we know who we are, because if we do, we will only be able to establish our position in defensive terms. That is, we will be able to criticize Islam, but we cannot offer a replacement to that which Islam is putting out to us. And this is what has been happening in the West for a long time. However, the West must cease to think in defensive terminology, although we must remain on the defensive, and once we rediscover our identity, assert itself to the Muslim world as the best option for society and mankind. What I'm speaking about is a gradual discovery through conversion of our society to discover our religious identity, our cultural identity, and the place that we want to have in the world. But the second step is likewise a conversion. However, this one involves the conversion of Muslims. And by that, I mean that as Islam has taken up a small residence in Western society, especially now that Muslims are being born on Western soil as first generation and second generation by birth Americans and Europeans, their religious identity is with Islam, but their land of birth is the West. And given this situation and the incompatibility of Orthodox Islamic theology with the religious and cultural heritage of the West, we cannot presume that those who follow Orthodox Islam will be able to be assimilated into the West in the same way that other immigrant groups have been in the past. However, assimilation is necessary because society cannot be at perpetual animosity with its own members. This is best expressed in the saying, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." Because of this situation with Orthodox Islamic theology, one of the only ways that we can achieve assimilation is through people choosing to leave Islam of their own volition for something else. And historically speaking, this is very difficult to achieve. However, it is most commonly achieved, and the Muslim world is very well aware of this, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, where there have been many conversions from Islam to various forms of Christianity, and it is completely reversing historically Muslim societies, turning them into non-Muslim societies, is simply put Christianization. Christianity has the most successful track record of doing this because, like Islam, it has an evangelical approach. It provides a concrete and consistent answer to life's questions, which many people have, and at the same time, it shares certain religious similarities with Islam. The final step that I propose is the family, and this applies equally to men and women, because men and women must rediscover the beauty that is marriage and children, that the family is the nucleus of society, and children are the spine which gives structure, stability, and prosperity to society's future. It's clear that no society can survive without children. If there are more people than there are jobs, the people will go to other parts of society and the world, and with that they will in turn influence wherever they go. If there are too few people to fill the needs of society, then people from other countries must be imported in, and as a result, those people who come will influence us, and they will change our culture. And the latter has been happening in the West for more than a century, and it is shown most vividly in Europe. During the 20th century, many Europeans, for various reasons, stopped having families at a sustainable rate, and in addition, many of them had a high abortion rate. And as a result, the population declined. So in order to fill many of the jobs and positions in society that were now not being taken up, they had to import people to take their place. And where did they look to? The Muslim world. And this process has been continuing to today. And I know I'm not the only one to mention this, but it is very possible that if this situation continues, Europeans could possibly under-reproduce and abort themselves out of existence, while Muslims will reproduce themselves into the places where Europeans once resided. So these 3 points, the conversion of the West, the conversion of the Muslims, and the promotion of the family, will cause a gradual, long-lasting change in Western society that will last for generations. But into this, I want to add that we must take many smaller measures, both assertive and protective, within the West. To this, we must continue to use our resources to identify and prevent terrorism. We must push for legal immigration and the enforcement of our immigration laws within our societies. We must continue to oppose hate speech legislation, manipulative lawsuits, and the overturning of our legal and social structures in the name of tolerance or coexistence. Additionally, we must respond to these and the many other smaller situations that we will encounter in the context of these long-term goals. The West has a long challenge ahead of itself, and the consequences of the decisions we make today will affect us for generations unknown. We in the West have something special, though, the Muslim world does not have. We have a religious and a cultural heritage that raised us up from the ashes of the fallen Roman Empire into a great civilization. Therefore, it's in our best interest. It's in the best interest of the Muslims who are living in the West, and it's the best interest of Muslims and people around the world that we rediscover our religious and cultural identity that made the West the envy of the world. And through discovering that and re-accepting the wonder of who we are, where we came from, why we exist, and where we are going, can we approach the Muslim world and the people living in the West with what we have and bring them into our society, as well as preserve our own heritage for generations to come. And to this I want to say thank you very much for listening to me. I appreciate it.
You want to handle the questions, or should I call?
We'll do the pass the microphone.
No, but, yeah, if I just get close, if you're not a camera.
So you wait until the microphone arrives, okay? Who's first? I know Larry is usually chopping.
Not a general question, but a more narrowly focused question. You use the word theology a lot. And is that really, are you really talking about theology means the study of the nature of God? Are you really talking about theology, or do you really mean Islamic doctrine, Islamic law? Just a small point, but I find myself being confused by that sometimes.
Well, that's an excellent question. I'm glad you asked that. I speak of theology because doctrine is a part of theology. Doctrine is the understanding of dogma. A dogma is a divinely revealed religious truth. It's what theology works with. And a doctrine expresses that truth in whatever religion you're speaking of. So when I speak of Islamic theology, I'm referring to the beliefs about Allah that Islam holds to be as such, and what they mean for them, how they are, what are the limitations, what are the implications of these beliefs. So this is what I mean when I refer to theology.
Well, is it a theological issue, say, if Islam commands that an apostate must die, or if Islam commands that when Islam does not have the strength to prevail by war, then it makes a truce for 10 years. I mean, there are a million doctrines and laws that constitute Islamic law and practice. And again, you seem to be using theology as a catch-all term for all of Islamic doctrine. It just, are those theological issues, or something else?
Well, I respond to that by saying if they weren't theological issues, then they could be changed. You know, some people talk about a reformation of Islam. Can Islam be reformed? Can these things, as you mentioned, the killing of apostates, creating a truce for 10 years as a deceptive measure, could this be changed? Is it possible to have this exist in this, or have this taken out of Islam and still remain as a religious Muslim? And what I'm saying is, because these issues are theological, they come from a theological root and a perspective, they can't be changed. So if they were to be changed, then I would say no, they're not theological. That's what would be referred to as a discipline. A discipline is something that a man institutes into a religion, but it can change. A great example of this in the Catholic Church is, to most people's not knowing, it's married priests. That can change. That is a man-made discipline. However, certain positions, such as the Christian belief that Jesus is God, the perspective on the Eucharist, the perspective on the Incarnation, these are theological beliefs. They can never change. They are revealed as such, and to deny them, it would mean to deny one's own belief. To commit heresy is what it would be. So yes, one can, in theory, deny certain aspects of Islam. However, it would mean that person falls into heresy.
One more. Sure. Going to the larger issue, I understand what you're saying. I want to compliment you, especially on the first part of your talk, because it brought something into focus that was really useful. The fundamental sort of boiling down the difference between the West and Islam to sort of basic principles. And if I were to sum it up, it would be the West, or the Christian West, or the Christian and Jewish West, or Christian classical and Jewish and Germanic West, however you want to define it, has a belief in God and truth, and that this truth forms the world and man, and man's life is about conforming himself and following that truth or that God. Whereas Islam, there really is not a notion of goodness or truth in itself, but rather only the will of Allah, from which it follows that the only thing for man to do is to obey that will. So it's a radically different structure of being.
Okay. Do you foresee the need to, of course, obviously inspired by Larry, to expel all Islamic immigrants from Western countries?
Well, what I'm going to say to that is we need to enforce our immigration laws first. We need to enforce our immigration laws and what's there. But that's a different issue altogether, I think, in certain respects. As regard to expelling people, what I'm going to say is we're not in a position to do that. Even if we could, it's completely impossible to remove any religious thought from any society, because, as I mentioned, the real issue here is with conversion. People come to believe in a religion. It's a thought process. It's an acceptance of a belief system. Saudi Arabia is very popular for saying there are no Christians or Jews in Saudi Arabia. But I can tell you definitively that there are at least 1 million Christians living in Saudi Arabia, and there are Jews who live there as well. The reason is people do convert, as well as there are immigrants who come. And they choose to, yes, secretly. So one can create a public face where religion might appear not to be there, but privately it will still exist under the surface. Just because you don't see something does not mean it's not there. Same within the West. We could, if one was to say we could get rid of all Muslims in the West, that wouldn't get rid of them, because there would still be people who would believe in Islam.
But it would get rid of most of them.
Maybe. I can't say. The case of Spain is a really good example. Because Portugal expelled all Muslims from Portugal in 1492, and they went to Spain. Now, Muslims were not officially expelled from Spain until 1609. However, what happened with that is you had many people who would convert to Catholicism and live outwardly as Catholics, but inwardly they were Muslims. And many of these people were involved in starting revolts. They were involved in insurrections against the Spanish government. This was one of the reasons for the event of the Inquisition, which many people talk about. It was a lot of bad things happened during it. However, if we understand where these people came from, you can see why they did it. And even after 1609, there were still many Muslims who lived in Spain, and they still had varying degrees of influence. So
But less.
less. But like I said, what we're looking at a situation in the West is you're having Muslims who are born as first and second generation, mostly Europeans and Americans. They're here to stay. I mean, they're here to stay. This is their homeland. If someone may be of Pakistani descent, but Pakistan is not his homeland. England is his homeland. London, his flat in London is his homeland. His apartment in New York.
But does he
is his
acknowledge
homeland.
England as his homeland? They don't.
Once again, that's another issue. But it's their homeland in the sense that they live there. However, the obedience is to Islam.
I'm saying after World War II, the German government banned Mein Kampf, publication of Mein Kampf. And I believe that ban is supposed to expire in a few years. Okay,
Without the mic so close.
the German government banned Mein Kampf after World War II. Okay, and it's a ban that's due to expire in a few years. My question is, I might be mistaken. I think Geert Wilders has proposed in the Dutch government to ban the Quran, saying that it's a hateful, that it incites hate. And I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
I have a lot of respect for Geert. I had the pleasure of meeting him last year, and he's a very interesting, intelligent, and a man who really believes in his convictions, and I do support him. However, with regard to banning the Quran, I would say not to ban the Quran, because people need to see what's in that book. People need to understand what this religion teaches. Not Muslims per se, but people in the West. We need to know what this religion says. We need to know what it's saying about us, what about our contemporaries, people of the past, about fellow Muslims. If we do not know who we are, if we do not know who they are, how will we be able to respond to them and present the West and ourselves to them? Into this, I would also encourage that people in the West especially read the Hadith. The Hadith are the sayings of Muhammad. What did Muhammad actually say? Don't believe what a professor said. Don't believe what I said. Go read it yourself. Teach yourself. Go read the books of Islamic history. See what Muhammad said as written by the Muslims themselves. I put into this an excellent example. There's a Coptic priest. His name is Father Zakaria Boutros. He lives in hiding in this country. And what Father Boutros does is he runs a show in Arabic. And he simply goes into the Quran, goes into the Muslim Hadith, and he reads selections. And he reads what the classical Muslim commentators have to say about it. Through his show alone, 500 people have left Islam and joined the Coptic Orthodox Church. It is estimated that up to 20,000 have converted indirectly. Many Muslim people are unaware of what their own religion teaches. So, in one sense, we have a responsibility to show them what their own religion says, as well as to show our people, so that we can come back and say, this is what you say, however, I'd like to show you something that you might find a little better, something you might find more amenable. And it does influence.
Yeah,
One observation I had regarding Islamic theology is that Muhammad himself never seemed to be subject to any temptation that he had to overcome, and that differs from that of Jesus or of the Buddha. And Muhammad was also never really chastised, and any time he wanted something, Allah found the way to provide him with it, and that differs from, I think, Moses, who got himself in some trouble. And I think, might that be one of the root problems we have with Islam?
Well, I'd like to say that it is true that many times Allah justifies Muhammad's actions, especially during the latter part of his life. However, it's kind of funny you mentioned that, because I mentioned Allah does as he wills for the sake that he wills. I'm sure some of you have heard of the Satanic Verses, Salman Rushdie. That actually comes from an incident in the Quran. It's narrated by the historian Tabari, and it's mentioned by numerous Quranic commentators. Basically what happened is Muhammad claimed that something that he preached was literally the word of the devil. The devil possessed him and spoke through him certain verses of the Quran. However, what happened was, afterwards Allah came to Muhammad and said, Muhammad, why did you say that? And Muhammad said, I'm sorry, my Lord, forgive me. And Allah said, that's okay. Allah has abrogated those words from the Quran. He has taken them out. And Allah changes what he wills. Allah does what he wills. So I do agree with you. And I think that when we look at Muhammad's life, we can see a character of a person who was very troubled and who in many ways used his own position as a religious leader to do things for himself and his followers, namely to aggrandize himself and to do it at the expense of others.
I'd like to ask if you seem to be only against illegal immigration, that you don't seem to think there's any value in trying to curtail legal immigration, including continued from Muslim countries. And the second thing is, I think what Stan says is true, that that's why I wonder if jihad really means spiritual struggle, because from what I understand, women have to cover themselves so men don't feel any temptation. If they have sexual needs, they can take 4 wives and they can get rid of one to get another one. If it, there's what is the overcoming in Islam that could possibly be this spiritual struggle that they speak of in jihad? Jihad is it not, mainly violent taking up the sword for Islam?
I'll answer both parts about those. First, regarding the immigration, yes, there do need to be curtails for legal immigration, curtails on immigration from the Muslim world. I think it's the author Serge Trifkovich writes about this as one very necessary solution that needs to happen. We've had literally, as some people have described, a hemorrhage of people that have come in from the Muslim world because of the liberalization of immigration laws. So yes, this does need to happen, and this is an important part of a general solution, as if I did not emphasize that enough. With regard to the second question, the spiritual struggle with jihad. Jihad it can be interpreted as a spiritual struggle in some senses. You'll find this primarily in Shia Islam, in aspects of Shia Islam, as well as within Sufi Islam, which tend to focus on a personal relationship with Allah and coming to some kind of closeness with Him. It's true in Islamic theology that no one can have a direct personal relationship with Allah, but one can come close, especially within the case of Sufism. So yes, this does exist. However, if one were to look at the classical texts of Islam, any of what's called the Maghazi literature, the conquest literature, which describes the battles which caused Islam to spread throughout the world, the Futuh al-Sham, the conquest of Syria, the Futuh al-Jazira, the conquest of the Arabian Peninsula and in Iraq, the conquest of Egypt, you'll find the word jihad is used universally within the context of a war for the purpose of spreading, in this case, Islam to a non-Muslim people. And literally the word jihad comes from the Arabic word jahada, which means to struggle with somebody for a certain cause. And it's always used in the context, not always, but very frequently used in the context of spreading Islam. But it can mean a spiritual struggle within oneself, and as I mentioned, some people, especially Sufis, tend to interpret the covering of the burqa, or people with Sufic influences.
To the extent that jihad does mean a spiritual self-overcoming, what the hell are they overcoming?
The 5 pillars, that's the appeal. The 5 pillars, you just do that, you make the Hajj, you do the charity, the prayers. You don't have to be thinking all in. That, in a way, is its appeal, as opposed to Christianity and Judaism and all this struggle to be good and so on. That, in a way, is its appeal. That is my understanding.
With regard to overcoming, and struggles, as I mentioned, this is usually found in Sufism. It's usually a very liberal interpretation. It's not the most common interpretation. It is certainly a lesser form. The appeal of Islam is indeed that one attains salvation through achieving 5 simple steps, essentially. So, yes.
Some of the people were thinking they're less threatening?
Yes, that is very true with Sufism. Sufism is very strange because it takes many different forms within Islam. Some forms which go all the way to being almost like American New Age, and some forms which can be very close to Orthodox Islam. The great Muslim theologian Al-Ghazali, who encouraged the immigration of Muslims to the non-Muslim world for the purpose of bringing Islam, was a Sufi himself. So once again, there's a wide range of variety within Sufism. Sufism is often used to provide, as some people have said, a softer face to Islam because it is generally very liberal and sometimes even heretical in their beliefs, especially in the context of Orthodox Islamic theology. So yes, it does provide a much softer face.
In what respect are they heretical?
Sufism really emphasizes a personal relationship with Allah. It generally tends to be very nonviolent. It's very passive, and they generally tend to focus more on themselves, personal development. It's very similar to Christianity, and Sufism itself was actually influenced by Christianity. The word Sufi comes from the Arabic word for wolf, suf, and literally means from the verb tasawwuf, to become woolly, because Muslim people who were aesthetically inclined imitated the practice of Christian monks living in the desert, anchorites, by dressing in woolen cloaks and meditating for hours and eating very little foods or practicing other kinds of bodily penance. But once again, this was a small group. It has always existed within Islam since its earliest days, but they do not represent mainstream Orthodox Islamic teaching necessarily.
I still don't understand what is the struggle that they're talking about.
Once again, as I mentioned, Sufism is often...
Keep going to Sufism. Sufism
Yeah.
is not mainstream Islam.
That's true. That's very true.
When
They
mainstream
literally pull the wool.
about jihad is self-struggle, what are they talking about?
Well, as I mentioned, they're using a very liberal interpretation.
I don't know what that means.
They're using an interpretation that's not common. In other words, it's a lesser interpretation. Jihad does mean holy war. But what I'm saying is, when they speak of in terms of a spiritual struggle, it can be interpreted this way, but it is unique mainly to Sufism. This interpretation is found not commonly in Sunni Islam.
So then what you're saying is, when they talk about jihad, it's
There is an aspect of trying to prevent oneself from sinning. There is an aspect to try to prevent oneself from doing things that would be un-Islamic. So in that case, it's true. But it said, for the most part, jihad does mean a holy war.
My understanding is that Sufism, particularly in Asia Minor, was very close in some sense to Christianity, and that it offered a bridge enabling a large number of the indigenous population to convert to Islam, that Sufism had a sort of special reverence toward a personal relationship with the Prophet Isa, that is Jesus. Any comment on that?
What you said is very true. It's the same in Shi'ism. Shia Islam has often been highly influenced by Christianity and Judaism, and you'll even find in some sects of Shi'ism literally Christian practices. There's one sect known as the Qizilbash. I think they exist, I believe, only in southeastern Turkey. I think most of them have gone by now. But at one point they were very prolific, and these people actually had, as part of their worship ritual, and I don't know if any of you have ever been to a Catholic church for a Mass, but when they do the consecration of the bread and wine, they actually did their own variation of a consecration of bread and wine. So Shi'ism is highly influenced by Christianity as well as Sufism, and it is very true that many Christians did convert to Islam because of these similarities between the two.
The Alawite sect in Syria has a special reverence for the Virgin Mary.
All Muslims have a special reverence for the Virgin Mary. In the case of Islam, Islam has a slightly different interpretation of the Virgin Mary, but she's considered the best of all women, even better than Muhammad's youngest wife, Aisha, I believe. I believe it's Aisha who Muhammad said was one of the mother of the believers, one of the best women who have existed. There were 5 of such women, and of them, Maryam is considered the most revered. And it's very interesting because many Muslims who have left Islam have actually come to learning about Christianity, becoming Christians, have discovered Christianity through learning about Maryam. This is especially true in Lebanon. I know a brother who works over there, a monk, and he has said that when you go to the shrine of Sayyiduna Lubnan, Our Lady of Lebanon, you will find more Muslims there than you will find Christians. And you've had a very large conversion through that. And this has happened historically.
And they do believe in the virgin birth?
They do believe in the virgin birth. They do believe they believe in the Immaculate Conception, which is that Mary was conceived without sin, and they do believe in the virgin birth. There's a saying of Muhammad, I forget the exact wording, but it said there are only two people ever in history who were born without sin, Jesus and Mary. And this is from Muhammad's own speaking.
The Catholic teaching on the Immaculate Conception didn't come till like the 18th century or something.
The dogma was not formally defined until the 18th century. However, the dogma had always existed within the church.
One of the first things you talked about conversion, and you said about Africa, and I'll quote Trifkovic. Somebody asked him about the conversion in Africa. No, maybe not from the Muslims necessarily. He said it was mumbo jumbo. A lot of this, I believe, is tribal, and a lot of this is probably against the Arabs, and it's tricky. I know that the French, now they controlled Algeria. The White Fathers were there for centuries. They never got any place, and they tried. So I don't know. I think it's going to be a real hard deal.
I'm glad you mentioned that because maybe I can give you a little bit of hope. I was listening to an Arabic interview on Al Jazeera, and it was between, I forget the name of the sheikh, but he's in charge of the Lighthouse School of Islamic missionary work, of Islamic da'wah in Libya. And he was interviewed in Al Jazeera about the situation of Islam in Africa. And he said that the case of Africa, it's, as we are seeing a tremendous immigration and change happening in Europe with Islam, so Africa is sub-Saharan Africa. Arab Africa is a little different situation, but sub-Saharan Africa is having the same thing happen, but on a much more profound scale. Now this is in the words of the Sheikh himself. The Sheikh said that there are approximately 1 billion people in Africa, and of them, about two-thirds of them live sub-Saharan Africa. These people, in the year 1900, there were only 100 converts, about 100 converts from Islam to Christianity, mostly Catholic. Now in 2000, two-thirds of those two-thirds have been converted. Two-thirds. So we're talking over 400 million people. And most of it's split between between Catholicism, Anglicanism, and various sects of Pentecostalism, with the Catholic Church holding the largest, then the Pentecostal sects, and then the Anglican Church. The fact is there's a change happening, and he even said in his own words that if this kind of conversion continues to happen, Islam will be extinguished from sub-Saharan Africa and possibly even from northern Africa, from Arab Africa. He has noted that ever since the year 2000, there have been 1 million Arab Muslim converts from Islam to Christianity. In that case, it's mostly split between the Coptic Orthodox Church, the Catholic Church, and the Pentecostals. So yes, there is a lot of tribalism that happens. There are many other issues involved in sub-Saharan Africa, but there's also a lot of hope. There really is.
I appreciate you bringing up what's going on in Africa, but have you ever looked at how Malaysia, Indonesia, and parts of the southern Philippines changed from being, I believe they were Hindu largely, into now Muslim? It wasn't through conquest, it was through dawah, through Arab merchants or Pakistani merchants coming and converting the locals, and how they went from kind of a minority to a larger majority, and now where you have them becoming more orthodox, or at least far more influence from Saudi Arabia with Wahhabism, whereas before they'd been sort of more tolerant versions that were more appealing.
I'm glad you mentioned more tolerant version because, as many people will point out, it was in the very Far East, Islam did not spread by violent conquest. It spread by conversion that began with the coming of Sufi missionaries, specifically to Bangladesh. So I mentioned Sufism earlier, how Sufism is often used to introduce Islam to a population and to draw them into it. And then through conversion, the population over time tends to assume a more orthodox view, usually moving out of Sufism into more orthodox Sunnism. That's what happened in Bangladesh, in Indonesia, in Malaysia, and in Mindanao, in the southern Philippines.
So that's in keeping with your idea that it changed.
What'd you say?
That's in keeping with your idea that the basic doesn't change, even though it may sometimes seem more moderate or mystical or even quasi-Christian. The basic theology is not going to change. So does that influence the idea that we can have, well, I mean, so many Muslims are not, really do just want to live here and basically simply follow the faith while also living in the West. But would you say that still is a danger to us because the faith will always hold, as you said?
Well, I would say to this, with the case of many Muslims, it creates a terrible situation for them because, now, and this is, I'm trying to present this from the perspective of as though I were a faithful Muslim. I genuinely believe in Islam. I truly am convinced that it is the truth and that I have found and that this religion is right. The question is, though, if I'm honest with myself and I really understand my text and my history, my religion teaches certain things that maybe I don't like. Maybe I don't believe in the killing of apostates. Maybe I believe that one can have a personal relationship with Allah than somebody else. Maybe I don't believe in Sharia. How do I reconcile that with myself? And the problem is it cannot be reconciled because it's a theological issue, and there are many Muslims, especially ones who are very well aware of their faith and understand its tenets, who are aware of this problem, and many of them are afraid to address it for fear of becoming heretics within their own religion and for fear of being damned in the afterlife, as well as rejection by their own Muslim families. And so what many of them do is they try to ignore the issue, or they try to downplay it, or they try to emphasize their beliefs while ignoring the teachings of Orthodox Islam. So it creates almost a kind of... they're trying to move in two directions at once. They're trying to be faithful to their religion, but they are trying also to be faithful to their conscience. And you can imagine if this is happening to people on a massive level throughout society, the kind of confusion it generates, the kind of anxiety, personal anxiety it generates. I genuinely believe this is key to my salvation. I'm going to go to hell and burn forever unless I believe this. But something just doesn't seem right to me. Something just seems wrong. How do I reconcile this? And it's impossible. So in that way, I genuinely feel a sense of compassion for them, the ones who truly believe and are struggling with this, because it's when you're looking at your beliefs and your entire worldview is being questioned, that's hard.
Not so long ago, I heard Larry Oster, and he said, what we have to do is get rid of Islam, let them go back to their historic lands and do what they want to do and leave us, because they will not assimilate. They cannot and they shall not. And the last time I heard these two gentlemen speak was when they said it is absolutely a religion. Islam is a religion. My issue is, if we can say this is a political ideology, then maybe we can have them do whatever they want, but not here.
I really would like to say it's a political ideology. I really would, because if it was a political ideology. I would like to say that, because if it was a political ideology, well, that's another issue. As I mentioned, I speak about Orthodox Islam and trying to speak the Orthodox perspective. I'll try to give the Orthodox perspective in this as well. The case, if it was a political ideology, we would be able to change it. There would be room within the system for it to be moderated, for there to be a reformation, for there to be a kind of democratization or some kind of change. There would be at least the potential for some of this to exist. The problem is that political systems are not based on what people believe to be divinely revealed unchanging truth.
Let me just say, Mr. Bieszad, you have